When you build an SLO, you really focus on service level objective. You focus on starting with the customer, and then you try to figure out how complex or how reliable the infrastructure needs to be to deliver a certain level of the service to the customer. Although some people will argue they can build 100% reliable systems, I mean, that's pretty much impossible. And if it is, it's very, very expensive. So now you really have this balance between how much you want to invest in infrastructure versus what the return is and how much it's going to cost you, right? So that's exactly what the SLO is designed to do.
Service providers spend a tremendous amount of time and resources building the infrastructure to keep their software systems reliable and their customers satisfied. But can the burgeoning service level objective market help ease the burden for them? We'll find out from one of the industry's leading innovators. Today, we're pleased to welcome Marcin Kurc, the co-founder and CEO of the SLO platform, Nobl9. Marcin suggests that SLOs are a necessity for any software team trying to stay ahead of the curve and operate efficiently. Tune in to learn how his company, Nobl9, has already changed the trajectory of the emerging SLO market, and hear Marcin's valuable advice to new entrepreneurs. IT Visionaries is brought to you by Salesforce platform. If you love the thought leadership on this podcast, Salesforce has even more meaty IT thoughts to chew on. Take your company to the next level with in-depth research and trends right in your inbox. Subscribe to a newsletter tailored to your role at salesforce.com/newsletter. Welcome everyone to another episode of IT Visionaries. And today we have the CEO of a company called Nobl9. That's Nobl9, Marcin Kurc. He's joining us today, and he's going to talk all about SLOs and SLAs and why we even need software to check that stuff out. Marcin, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Hey, listen, everyone has software. Everyone knows about SLAs. We're going to dive into that. But before we dive into that segment, we want to enter the lightning round. The lightning round is brought to us by Salesforce platform, the #1 cloud platform for digital transformation of every experience. Marcin, this is where we ask you a couple questions outside of the realm of work so our audience can get to know you a little bit better. You ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right. You're a developer. You have IT background. What's one of the craziest problems you've ever had to solve?
I think the craziest one that's never ending is consolidation, removing some kind of technology that never goes away, right? I didn't say mainframe, but that's one of those. I'm old.
When you were growing up, did you have any mentors or heroes you looked up to that made you say, hey, I want to learn the technical side of business. I want to understand how to develop. I want to build things.
That's a very interesting question. I don't want to say one mentor that came later. Growing up in what it used to be communist Poland, the entire country of US has been this goal, mentor, something to look up to. So I, at some point, ended up here. I think that was probably the biggest impact.
And how old were you when you came to the United States?
21.
And what was your first thought when you landed?
Well, it doesn't look like what I've seen on the movies. So yeah.
Where was the first place you ended up?
I ended up in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Interesting place.
Okay, I mean, yeah, I could see that. You probably saw, not a lot of movies are shot in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Not really. Yeah, no, that was a little different.
And from the different immigrants that we've had on the show, they all talk about aspirational, creative content. They made them say, hey, this is a great place to be. So when you were a young kid or a teenager in Poland, you were obviously watching and consuming entertainment or content from America. Which movie did you think America was going to look like?
Well, I'll probably say Animal House. That was interesting. A few other ones.
Okay, Marcin likes to party, man. Well, welcome to the show. Welcome to IT
Those
Visionaries.
days are over, but yeah, it was.
Welcome to the show, man. Listen, we're excited to have you on. Your company, Nobl9, does something that I think we all can potentially be customers of. But for those who don't understand this business, let's start there. Why do SLOs or SLAs even need to be monitored in the first place? I'd love for you to explain to our audience, what is Nobl9, how you came about this idea, what's it do?
You got it. So a few years ago, or more than a few years ago, our previous company has been acquired by Google. We knew what we wrote was had a great business value, but we made some mistakes on architecture and building out the product to be scalable. So when Google got interested, we had this conversation during the M&A process that we have to rewrite this thing and make it really scalable for the customers. Day one, amazingly, Google stood up a development team when we came in the first day. Here's your team. Let's do this, right? And that's when we will learn how Google operates, how they implement solutions in microservices, how they measure success, how they get ready to release products, and the mindset of really focusing on the customer has been very, very interesting to us. And of course, we've been talking about this for years, working for large IT organizations. We all know how it works, right? You monitor things and there are signals, but it's really, really hard to translate those signals to the impact on business, on the customer. And for us, SLOs were very, very interesting on how that could be translated from technology to business people and vice versa, right? So that was very intriguing for us, very interesting. So with my co-founder, Brian Singer, we started really thinking about how to take that technology and apply it across the board to an average enterprise. And that's what we did. 2019, we decided to fund Nobl9, and the rest is history. We're here.
And I'd love for you to explain this further because I'm very fascinated by how this works. For those who are younger developers who haven't had to measure this, the impact of software, tell us what a service level objective is. That's an SLO for the audience.
Service level objective, in a nutshell, is basically a composite of quality of service level signals that tell you something about how your application is behaving. So, simplistic example, if you monitoring something, you get a signal that something is down, for example, right? And it could be any component of your infrastructure. And that doesn't really tell you what it means to your business. Does it mean that you're losing money? Does it mean some of your customers are not receiving service? Does it mean that some of those customers are receiving degraded service? And when you multiply it by microservices and the complexity of today's applications, modern architecture applications, you can see how many different failure points you have, and even understanding what the definition of certain level of service is across different parts of this application, right? Because you got different teams that probably have different frameworks or thinking in different categories. When you build an SLO, you really focus on service level objective. You focus on starting with the customer, and then you try to figure out how complex or how reliable the infrastructure needs to be to deliver a certain level of the service to the customer. Although some people will argue they can build 100% reliable systems, I mean, that's pretty much impossible. And if it is, it's very, very expensive. So now you really have this balance between how much you want to invest in infrastructure versus what the return is and how much it's going to cost you, right? So that's exactly what the SLO is designed to do. You choose the number of nines, and depending on level of service, let's think you're Netflix, for example. If I'm streaming something, you're getting high definition, you're happy. If there's some kind of degradation on my platform, either from, latency or potentially being able to serve that content, the basic question is, what's the level of degradation and the period of time of degradation of service that's going to impact the end customer to the point where the customer is going to start thinking about moving to a different platform, right? If you see pixels for 10 seconds, 5 seconds, probably not going to impact you. You're not going to be thinking about going to a different platform for that reason. But if you keep logging in and you keep seeing this behavior, you probably start thinking about moving somewhere else, right? So SLOs really measure the quality of service inputs to understand how we're performing and is this customer being impacted, and therefore our business being impacted at the end of the day, right? There's an impact, disk went out. Okay. I don't know if you're getting, seeing degradation, if you're seeing pixels, but if I start measuring that all the way to the customer, then I have a really good idea of how those customers are being impacted.
My background's in software. I've been in the software business for a while. And, back in the day, companies would put service level agreements or service level objectives on us where, like 6 nines was like the gold standard. Like, can you do 6 nines of uptime? In fact, I worked for a network as a service company, and that's what everyone asks. Like, can you get up to 6 nines of reliability?
As a SLA or SLO? Because I want to drill down on this one.
Oh, I don't remember now, but they basically said, hey, that was an SLA. Hey, you need to provide 6 nines of connectivity to me if I'm going to rely on your system to, throw up networks, private networks, because we were trying to compete with Amazon Direct Connect and other services like that, Azure Express Route and that kind of thing, a hard line to the building. Give us an idea. Who is the best person to utilize this? Is it like me, the vendor, like I need it installed in my software so I know what I'm delivering? Or is it more like me, the customer, I need to keep track of all these people that I depend on and they owe me a service level agreement that I'm paying for. And when one of them goes down, I want to be able to dispute that.
Right, right. That's exactly why I asked this question, right? Because it
Yeah.
becomes very interesting. SLA is basically a legal contract between the service provider and the customer, right?
Yeah.
And with as with any contract, there are many, many pages of exclusions and other things, and potential definitions how you calculate that SLA, right? And
Yeah.
your 5 nines might ultimately be 2.5 9, right?
Yeah.
It could get to that level with all those exclusions. You need to have a contract in place, there's no question, because there's a relationship. I rely on my provider, and I want the assurance, and assurance needs to be in a legal contract, most likely. However, if the company or the service provider is experiencing outages or degradation of service, at some point I really stop caring about the legal contract, because I'm not going to be sending my lawyers or have discussions with that provider, over and over to figure out if I'm getting, $15 of credit, because again, it does not matter to my business. My business is most likely taking deeper damages than what I can get in terms of refunds. So that is kind of the necessary evil. But the SLOs are really for the service provider to understand what's going on with their services dependencies and how it's impacting the end customer, so that we don't have that conversation, right? And you can create your SLOs based on specific contracts. If you have per customer SLAs or SLOs, or you want to expose SLOs directly, and we see a lot of customers that start doing this, being very, very transparent with their customers. And again, it's a complexity, right? I cannot tell you how many times we talk with prospects, customers, and they tell us, okay, we have 4 nines SLA. And once we start having this conversation, start peeling the onion, turns out that they present a 4 9 SLA to the end customer. Meanwhile, we find 2 or 3 services that have 2 9s in their architecture, right? So all of a
Yeah.
sudden, how can you provide a 4 9 at the end of this,
That's kind of what I was getting at, because we didn't really have a tool to track that
right,
for us.
right. So now if you take a step back, SLOs will do just that for you. First of all, also very, very much amazing, but not that surprising situation is when we have a conversation, and 3 teams in a room figure out that their definition of SLA is completely different, right? So once again, even if you agree on the 3 4 9s, the definition of those 9s is different. At the end of the day, might be providing much different result that what you need. So implementing SLOs across complex architectures help you that just with the setting the bar, right? This is the framework. This is what we're presenting. This is what the consumer of the internal service understands, and then can build dependency on this. That's why it becomes so important and so powerful for service providers, especially in a distributed service-oriented architecture. I didn't say service-oriented architecture. It's really microservices architecture that really helps you provide the true information to the end customer. And again, you can still exclude things like downtime and other things which you might not believe that are impacting anything. Some people don't. Some people just want to show the true service level to their customer. But it at least gives you the baseline to which the teams need to adhere to, gives you the ability to force teams to use this framework, define SLOs before they check in the code. As a matter of fact, we can also block the ability to check code and deploy new code if you did not define an SLO, and if that SLO doesn't adhere to a certain level that your organization is looking for.
You kind of hit on 2 things that I see that this tool really helps a company with. It sounds like general maintenance, but also how you build, because you just mentioned like, hey, if I'm checking in code, this tool, it sounds like, can help me identify, will I be in violation, or will it support what I've promised to customers? Is that accurate? Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, or very basic feature, which is you have to define an SLO, right? Your organization might deliver a framework that it's a baseline for that organization, but if you don't check in an SLO with your code, or there's no ability for you to deploy, or there's no ability for you to check that code until you have an SLO, which really forces the organization to adhere to those standards being set across the board, right?
Yeah. And you were talking about, this is something that you kind of hinted at in the very beginning. And I'm thinking about like a modern infrastructure system or a modern service delivery system. We rely so much, every software company relies on another provider 100%. Like, no one is building their stack full suite, full stack, like they own every part of the delivery. That's not true. Everyone is using something else. So it looks like checking from your site that you've built a system that allows me to also, all my partners, all my vendors, all my integrations, all of it's being tracked. But then you kind of hinted on, on the one thing that is that concept of that technical debt, right? And maintaining things that are old, because every company that delivers a modern service probably also has something that they kind of still carrying. You know what I mean? Talk about how this plays together, because that's one of the challenges of the modern software company. And I think most of the CIOs and CTOs that listen to our show would agree with is like, your service is still has many dependencies where the customer doesn't know that, right? The customer is on the other side saying, hey, my instance of your software is down, but it might not be you. You know what
And
I
the
mean?
customer doesn't care who it is, right? It's
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
your problem. It's not their problem. Yeah.
Yeah. How does that all integrate together? Because it seems like this is something that when we were doing this back when I was in software development, we would integrate all these different infrastructure and alerting systems that would, like New Relic, that would constantly alert us of all these different things happening. I remember one time one of my back end infrastructure guys
You
looking at
know
me
all the
like,
problems. You know all
yeah,
the
well,
problems.
he's like, this just beeps all day. I don't even know what to do.
Yep. 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 Of course.
He's like, and he was like, hey, unless somebody calls and says there's a problem, I'm not going to look at that.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's start from the top, right?
Yeah.
The dependencies, of course, everybody's got something, Okta or, some other elements, or even internal organizations that have built something and then you discover this been built by the guy 20 years ago and it's running on the desktop, somewhere under the desk, right? Things like that happen. Trust me, even
Yeah.
today. More and more, we really see customers requesting their providers to expose SLOs so that they can use it for calculation of their own SLOs, right? Or if they're taking dependency, like it will be ideal if we can have everybody exposing those SLOs and then it flows into my system. If I take the dependency and automatically I cannot give you 4 nines if what I'm consuming is 2 nines, right? Ideally, we want to get to that level. Of course, it's super complex, a lot of money, a lot of time, but we see SLOs adoption accelerating, things are happening there. So hopefully we get to that level where we have transparency. If you think about security, right? Not that long ago, maybe 10 years ago, we believe people that put some kind of logo on their website and we put a credit card in, oh, they're secure because they have a logo on it, right?
I remember that. Remember those days. Buy safe.
Exactly. Now we have all set of requirements and nobody's going to believe anyone. It's all very transparent. We have an understanding of what we're buying, what the frameworks are that they're developing against and securing against, right? So we got to this level of security pretty much, and reliability is really quickly behind it because as a customer, I don't want to take a dependency on a company that doesn't deliver me the service that they promise they do, and then they argue with me because they have SLN in place that's got a bunch of exclusions. Like that's just not going anywhere. So hopefully that happens. We're certainly building a product that is designed to do that multi-tier SLO dependency that you can take from your ecosystem, from your partners, or anybody else for that matter, right? The second point, technical debt. It's funny because, a lot of people, look, we're only a 5-year company. We don't have any technical debt. I'm like, yeah, sure. That's definitely the story, right? You probably have more technical debt than anybody else. And we have tons of customers that are using our systems with that in mind. Very significant portion of those customers are really focusing on planning how they use SLOs to really make decisions on the fact that, now we have to focus on accelerating features and that's our competitive advantage. But when we get to a certain point and we see degradation with SLOs, we need to change our thinking and flip back to at least turn some teams into fixing issues, dealing with technical debt. If you look up Flexera and Nobl9, one of our customers, they released a few videos that take you through the whole logic on how they think about business and how Nobl9 helps them really to make the right decision and manage teams and do planning even long term. So that's a very interesting concept, one of our core features or concepts behind a product. And I would say the majority of the customers are using Nobl9 for that purpose as well. And then, of course, the last one that you mentioned about, alerting. Every product today alerts. We alert too, right?
Yeah.
But we do have a feature that manages those alerts, again, based on SLOs. And the way we set it up is, you might have multiple different SLOs for one service. They're very similar. They're the same SLO, basically. They just differ. It just differs based on the time frame, right?
Yeah.
If you have three different ones, one might be, 15 minutes, another might be 2 hours, another one might be one day, for example. And when you define an error budget, and your error budget is basically the space where, if you enter that, you have a certain level of issues to burn, right, that are impacting the customer, but they're at the point where the customer still does not feel like they have to leave the platform, or they're getting significant impact, right? So a lot of our customers set in that way where if you see error budgets burning, but they're not really burning very fast, then you might just open a Jira ticket and, alert someone in the morning when they come to work and they check the tickets and like, okay, we have to look into those issues, but they're not pressing, right? However, when you have a combination of those SLOs and error budgets burning much faster, then you might make a decision that you want to page someone in the middle of the night, right? And again, that's been very, very important, especially with, their burnouts and great resignation and everything else that's been going on lately. A lot of companies really has been trying to figure out how to manage workload, how to make it easier on their employees. So it's been very interesting year or more that been working with some of our customers to really help them manage the pager fatigue and all the issues with support.
You mentioned that you learned about this world really from Google, it sounds like. Fast forward to right now, do you see like a lot of CIOs, CTOs? Are they more coming to you? Like, I'll give you an example. When we were in software, there was almost like a tipping point. At one point, it was like we were educating the customer, like we were really going hard in the paint, trying to educate customers what we did, and they'd listen to us and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, why is this necessary, and so on. And then there seemed to be like a tipping point where people were like, hey, I heard you guys do this for companies.
Yeah.
And so like, and this was like even network as a service. It got to the point where people like, oh, we want to be able to spin up a network, a private network, whenever we want to do some testing. And we're like, okay, now we've hit it.
Yeah.
Give me an idea for in this category. Are CIOs, CTOs, are they starting to demand this for you? Or is there still like an education road where you're educating them about like what this is available? Because I mentioned before, when I was developing software, we didn't have anything like this. We didn't like when things like we had these random alerting systems. My guy did for sure. My partner, he was like, I wish these things were more specific, because it would just be like, oh, it's not working,
Yeah. So I'll give you a little bit of history, right? Brian and I, when we first discovered SLOs and the whole framework behind it, to us, we dealt with those issues for our previous company. Like we never knew what we focus on. Of course, every customer is yelling at you. Every customer is important. And like, where do we start, right? It's been a huge issue for us. So going through this and solving this with Google and the knowledge of the team, which is absolutely amazing to us. But, to be honest with you, between Brian and I, we had those conversations like, yeah, this is yet another Google thing that who knows where it's going to go, right? Google can afford to do things, right?
Yeah.
At some point, we really start thinking about funding a company and doing this. Our first really gauging point was the fact that if Kubernetes wins and becomes de facto standard, then you cannot really do microservices / Kubernetes without SLOs, right? And at some point we saw that. So we made this decision, let's go and do this, right?
How did you come to that conclusion?
We were just observing the market, the pickup from the customers, how the customers been talking about this. And we had the luxury of, hearing it from a lot of customers with Google, right? We also seen Amazon building a clone that didn't really, it's still there, but at some point they also built a Kubernetes-based service, right?
Yeah.
So that was really very powerful to us, and we saw that happening. So then, once we started the company, our thinking was, well, SLOs are really SRE concept, and that comes off Google. So let's go after SREs, right? And I think it was a good strategy back then, because it was pre-pandemic. When we talk to SREs, they have an idea. We don't have to educate them as a small startup. We don't have to invest in education. So we're selling to the SREs. They love it. Makes sense. Great. But with pandemic, I would say probably, 6 months into it, we noticed a lot of just standard general IT organizations asking about it, right? And we start seeing a lot of the observability companies start talking about SLOs as well, maybe adding features, SLO features on their platform. So to us, that was very interesting. First of all, we changed our messaging a little bit. We went away from SRE. SREs get it. SREs need it. They use it. That's fine. But we start really presenting SLOs in the context of observability in general. How you make observability data actionable with SLOs, because there are so much more than what you get from tracing a problem, for example, or tracing an issue, right? And that was very interesting. That message was definitely resonating. And I would tell you, a year after that, maybe a year and a half after that, today, the organizations we're talking to are absolutely amazing to me. I would not, of course, you're gonna talk to Wall Street because they always experiment with new technology. They always play with the new stuff, right? Staying ahead. That's very strategic to them. But we're talking to very traditional enterprise companies that see the value in SLOs. And of course, there's education. There's always someone that's pushing that type of initiative. So education for the teams is quite important. And again, we assume that from the beginning. It makes a lot of sense because you want to do it right. A lot of people could get frustrated with how we apply those things, how the framework works. Back in the day, everybody was thinking we have to do a full SRE to do SLOs, and that's not a great idea to go in that direction because it's just flipping everything on its head, and it's hard to make that change in large organizations. Maybe with time we'll get there, but the fact that SLOs became really mainstream observability made it very, very easy for us to have those conversations. And I would tell you at this point, if your organization is not thinking about SLOs, you're behind because everybody else is. So, and I know Salesforce is doing this; it's been doing it for a while. So, yeah, it's fairly mainstream at this point. It's still a new market, developing market. There's no question about it. But the interest and the growth and ability to implement those services came a long way over the past 2 years.
Hey, listen, man, your first customer, you mentioned the SRE, site reliability engineers. That role itself is very new. You know what I mean? Like that was
Yeah.
It used to get bucketed in the DevOps group, and then they're like, "Oh, we just need someone to just dedicate it to keep the thing up."
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I don't know where it's gonna go. The labels, have changed because SREs were making so much more money than DevOps people, right? So everybody wants to be SRE. At the end of the day, I think there's, the answer is some kind of blend between those two profiles. And that's what we're really seeing out there. It's also helping us a lot.
Well, yeah, I think the future of dev, you kind of hit on it. For every company that's a giant company, like like our sponsor Salesforce that has many product catalogs, there's also startups that are very focused. And so like the whole future of building software, right? Our lead sponsor is the same thing, is integrating tools. It's integrating tools and services. So it makes sense that this whole new category is going to emerge, this monitoring of SLOs across services, because we already talked about it. Like back in the day when Microsoft was selling Word on a disk, like it was easy to control. Right? The software, the code was on that disk. It didn't rely on any other services. It worked on your machine. They only sold it to people who had Windows. They knew the OS would work. That's it. Like, it was a very controlled environment. But software today is not like that anymore. It is completely a mishmash of everyone else's tools on top of a little bit of code for, a lot of code that you do.
And the thing is, you don't have to know the code, and you should, and you probably most likely will not. You just gotta take a dependency on something producing some kind of result, right? And the consistency and the level of service of producing that result is what you care about, right? So
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So for every company that's out there, like you mentioned, like those young startups that are saying, "Hey, we have no technical debt," but you do rely on other services. Like we mentioned in the beginning, Okta, right? Like if someone's not able to log in your service, you can't tell them that, "Oh, well, Okta's not working today." Like that, they don't believe you and they don't care. Like you said, like it doesn't matter. Like I want to be able to log in and use this product.
Yeah.
When you think about where you are today, I mean, this is a very new category. Of course, this is enlightened. You were enlightened to like see what was going on at Google. Did you always know you were heading down this path? Like, hey, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to build a company, work in software. Did you always kind of have that like gut instinct that that's where the path you were going to go, or did you think something else when you were younger?
I would say yes, 100% from the beginning, right?
Yeah.
The only issue that I ended up in really good organizations, really having fun, working with smart people. My last job before a startup was AWS, and I joined when the company, part of the company was so small that, nobody really knew about it. And I will never forget, we were at some kind of industry event where people coming by asking if we're Amazon here to sell books. That was literally it, right? And we're standing there with AWS.
That's how early it was. Yeah.
This is gonna go well. And all my friends from the enterprise side, making fun of me. What are you doing there again? But that's where it started. And my point being, I always felt like working smaller teams, doing something interesting was that. But I was too lazy to just jump the ship, do something on my own, and it finally happened, right? So there's no reason to go back, and I hope I don't have to go back. I'm enjoying building companies, hiring people, growing it. That's the part of the fun, right?
Yeah. What would you say to that young engineer who's sitting there listening to the show, listening to your story, and they're on the verge, they think that they want to do something, but they haven't quite taken the step yet?
I would say just wait a couple months. I wouldn't tell anyone right now in this environment to quit your job and go crazy. Hey, but you might be resilient. You might be building a very resilient company, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, think about your life priorities. What do you like to do? That's the important part. And being in a startup, it's not what it used to be 20 years ago. When I was thinking about it, when I was looking at it, I had friends, doing startups where you're taking a significant pay cut, you're making a lot of sacrifices, and you feel like you're doing something, and it might be very, very rewarding, right? We're not there anymore. Startups are raising significant amounts of money. The salaries are really on par with anybody out there, right?
Oh, yeah.
You have to pay the talent. There's really no escape from it
Sometimes it's
anymore.
more. Some of
Right,
these big
exactly.
some of these big companies are really they're really overpaying engineers because they need them.
Yeah,
They need them to leave. They need
exactly.
that guy from Netflix to leave and come to me.
Yeah, exactly. And bottom line is the only risk you take is on the equity that you leave on the table, unvested stocks if you leave a company, and you're getting equity in a mature company that might not go anywhere. That's your only risk. But at the end of the day, that's always amazing experience. I can guarantee you, if you leave AWS or Google or Facebook for a startup and you want to go back in 2-3 years, they'll take you back. So the risk is very, very minimal, right? And don't be scared. Find yourself a good co-founder. That's always helpful. Although I admire people that have done it on their own, it's always better with a co-founder.
No doubt about it. One of the things that everyone always talks about, well, no, the number one reason to have a co-founder is in those dark moments when you start thinking yourself, maybe this doesn't work. You need someone to seize another path, right? Give me an idea of you and your co-founder. How would you describe your personalities? Are you more
complete
optimist?
opposites.
There's usually an optimist, pessimist guy. Like,
you know what? That part, not necessarily. We're complete opposites when it comes to, my co-founder Brian is very technical. I'm more business oriented, but there are many differences. But the optimist pessimist kind of switches depending on a day, a week, or a month, or an event, right? So it goes both ways.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, Marcin, it was a lot of fun having you on the show. You're opening a category that, looking back on it, like I said, I wish we had. I think we would have had an easier life because this, especially, by the way, I used to work in social media publishing. Really hard business to be in because we were, companies were relying on us to publish to Facebook, to Twitter, and all that stuff. And it's like we were always at the mercy of those APIs and their services. And we had no tools to be able to track this. Like we would just shrug our shoulders and just say that. So, but the way you envisioned it, what you've learned, I mean, it was fun to hear because you hit the nail on the head. The way modern tools are built, you're going to need something like this, 100%.
Yeah. I'm glad I know you got your experiences. I'm glad you recognize it. Thank you for the feedback. I appreciate it.
Hey, listen, man, there's a lot of phone calls with me just trying to, like you said, like you just described it, panicking, trying to call somebody on my team, hey, fix this. And they're like, I can't. Facebook's API is down. Twitter's API, you know what I mean? Like we literally nothing to do. And I was like, someone's got to fix it.
At some point it will fix itself.
Marcin, thank you for joining us today on IT Visionaries.
Thank you, Albert.
Hey, thanks for watching. Subscribe to this channel for more great IT thought leadership. And thanks to our partners at Salesforce Platform for making this show possible. Go to salesforce.com/newsletter to discover timely insights and useful tips tailored to your role.